I'm Elliot, the guy who builds bridges no one sees and keeps a family together no one thanks. At 32, I've spent my life being the reliable one, checking blueprints at dawn, fixing leaks at midnight, showing up for people who barely notice I'm there. But when my mom's text lit up my phone with big news for a family dinner, I let myself hope. Maybe tonight I'd finally be more than the son they forgot to celebrate. I didn't know then that their news would tear my world apart and show me a truth I'd been searching for my whole life. The text came through on a Wednesday afternoon, buzzing my phone while I was knee-deep in blueprints at the construction site. Dinner at Marino's, 7 p.m., big news. It was from my mom, Helen, sent to the family group chat, a place I'm usually the last to check. No follow-up, no emojis, just those words staring back at me. Big news. It wasn't the restaurant or the time that caught me. It was the weight of that word. Big. Like they wanted me to wonder. Like they needed me there. And despite the dust on my boots and the ache in my shoulders from a 12-hour shift, I knew I'd go, because no matter how many times I've felt like a stranger in my own family, they're still mine. At least that's what I told myself. My days are long, my hands are calloused, and my life is steady. If you call steady waking up at 5 a.m. to double-check bridge schematics before the crew arrives. I'm the guy who makes sure the numbers add up, the guy who fixes things when they break. But at home, I'm the guy who fades into the background. Growing up, I was the one who mowed the lawn, drove my little brother Nathan to soccer practice, and ate dinner alone when everyone else was too busy celebrating Nathan's latest trophy. My parents, Helen and Richard, always had a way of making me feel like an extra in their movie, one they didn't quite write into the script. It wasn't always obvious. From the outside, we looked like any middle-class family in Richmond, Virginia. 2 kids, a dog, a house with a slightly crooked mailbox I'd promised to fix for years. Helen was the PTA president, always organizing bake sales with a smile that could sell you anything. Richard, a retired accountant, spent his days golfing and nodding along to whatever Helen planned. And Nathan? He was the star, blonde, charming, the kid who could talk his way into anything and usually did. By 16, he was prom king. By 25, he was a banker with a corner office. Me? I was the one who carried Nathan's sports bag to the car so he wouldn't strain his throwing arm. I don't say this to complain. I learned early that love doesn't always look like confetti. Sometimes it's just showing up, doing what needs to be done, even when no one notices. But there were moments, small, sharp ones, that stuck with me. Like the Christmas when I was 12, and I unwrapped a generic sweater while Nathan got a new bike. Or the time I graduated college, top of my engineering class, and Helen said, "That's nice, honey," before turning to ask Nathan about his internship. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I didn't need their applause. But deep down, I kept waiting for the day they'd see me, not just as the reliable one, but as their son. That's why the text hit me harder than it should have. Big news. My family didn't do surprises. Helen planned everything down to the napkin color, and Richard never argued. Nathan only showed up if there was something in it for him. So what was this? A promotion for Nathan? An engagement? Or maybe, just maybe, something that included me? I let myself imagine it for a second. A toast to the whole family. A moment where I wasn't on the sidelines. It was a dangerous thought, but I couldn't shake it. The construction site was chaos that day. A delivery of rebar was late, and the foreman was yelling about deadlines. I stayed until 6:30, checking measurements one last time, my boots sinking into the Virginia mud. No time to change. I wiped my face with a rag, tossed my hard hat in the truck, and drove to Marino's. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gray. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Tired eyes, a faint scar on my jaw from a site accident years ago. I looked like someone who'd been running on fumes too long. "Come on, Elliot," I muttered. "Show up. It's what you do." Marino's was one of those upscale places where the lights are dim and the menus don't list prices. I pulled into the lot, my old pickup sticking out like a sore thumb among the SUVs. The air smelled like garlic and expensive wine as I walked inside. I could hear them before I saw them, laughter, loud and easy, spilling from the private dining room. My stomach twisted. Part of me wanted to turn around, drive back to my one-bedroom apartment and crack open a beer, but I kept walking, I always did. I turned the corner and stopped cold. There they were, my family, bathed in candlelight like they were posing for a magazine spread. Helen, her auburn hair pinned up, sipped red wine with that perfect smile. Richard sat beside her, arms crossed, chuckling at something Nathan said. And Nathan looked like he'd stepped out of a cologne ad, his tie loose, his grin wide enough to light the room. Even my grandfather George was there, sitting quietly at the end of the table, his hands folded like he was waiting for something. They were all there, caught up in their own world. But that wasn't what stopped me. It was the banner stretched across the back wall, glittery gold letters screaming loud enough to drown out everything else. "Congratulations to our real son!" My breath caught. The words didn't make sense, not yet, but they hit like a punch I didn't see coming. I stood there still in my dusty jacket, my work boots heavy on the polished floor. No one rushed to greet me. No one saved me a seat. Helen glanced up, her smile barely flickering. "Oh, Elliot, you made it," she said, like I was a neighbor dropping by uninvited. Nathan leaned back, smirking. "Rough day at the site?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah, ran late." I forced a smile, but it felt like a mask. The room was warm, the table set with crystal glasses and plates of half-eaten appetizers. I didn't belong here, not like this, not tonight. A waiter appeared, sliding a spare chair to the edge of the table. No one moved to make room. I sat down, my hands in my lap, trying to shrink into someone who wouldn't ruin their perfect moment. But perfect moments don't come with banners like that. Our real son. The words burned into me, sharp and unyielding. I looked at Nathan, laughing with Richard about some deal he'd closed. I looked at Helen, her eyes bright with pride I'd never felt aimed at me. And I looked at George, silent, watching me with something I couldn't read. This wasn't just a dinner. This was something else, something they'd planned without me, something they didn't think I'd question. I should have known better. I'd spent my whole life showing up for them, hoping for a place at their table. But as I sat there, the banner glaring down, I realized I might have been chasing something that was never mine to begin with. And whatever they were about to say, whatever big news they dressed up in glitter and wine, it was going to change everything. What's the moment you realized your family saw you differently than you thought? The banner's words, "Congratulations to our real son," hung over the table like a blade, sharp and gleaming, ready to cut through everything I thought I knew. I sat at the edge of the dining room, my work boots scuffing the polished floor of merinos, feeling the weight of my family's eyes, or lack of them. Helen sipped her wine, her smile as flawless as the crystal glass in her hand. Richard nodded along to Nathan's story, his laughter soft but deliberate. Nathan, lounging in his chair like a king, held court, his tie loose, his voice loud enough to drown out the clink of silverware. And George, my grandfather, sat silently at the far end, his gaze flickering to me, heavy with something unspoken. I gripped the arms of my spare chair, the one the waiter had dragged over when no one saved me a seat, and tried to breathe through the ache in my chest. This wasn't a dinner. This was a stage, and I wasn't part of the script. I'd barely settled when Nathan leaned forward, smirking at my dusty jacket. "Long day hauling bricks, Elliot." His tone was light, but his eyes weren't. They never were. I forced a nod, my throat tight. "Yeah, late delivery at the site." He chuckled, like my life was a punchline, and turned back to Helen, who hadn't looked at me since her half-hearted, "You made it." I scanned the table, linen napkins, plates of shrimp cocktail, their glasses catching the candlelight, and felt like an intruder in my own family. The banner burned into my vision. Real son. I wanted to ask what it meant, but my tongue felt heavy, glued by years of staying quiet, of letting their world spin without me. Helen raised her glass, her voice warm and theatrical. "To Nathan," she said, "our real son. Tonight we finally have something worth celebrating." The table erupted, Richard's deep laugh, Nathan's grin spreading wider, even a polite clap from a cousin I hadn't noticed until now. I sat frozen, my hands in my lap, the words sinking into me like stones. Real son. My glass stayed untouched, the water inside rippling from the vibration of their cheers. No one looked my way. No one noticed the way my jaw clenched, the way my heart thudded slow and heavy, like it was dragging me under. Nathan waved a hand, playing humble. All right, I'll spill," he said, his eyes glinting with something sharp, pride maybe, or victory. He leaned in, savoring the attention. "So, I did one of those DNA kits, just for kicks, you know. Thought it'd be fun to see if we had some royal blood or whatever." He paused for effect and the table leaned closer, hooked. "Turns out I'm not adopted. Not a donor kid, not a mix-up. I'm 100% yours, Mom, Dad, flesh and blood, the real deal." The room exploded again, more laughter. Helen's hand flying to her chest like she'd won the lottery, Richard wiping a tear from his eye with a napkin. "That's my boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion I'd never heard aimed at me. I stared at the tablecloth, my mind racing to catch up. Nathan, their biological son? We'd grown up believing we were both from a donor process, some clinical choice Helen and Richard made when they couldn't conceive. That's what they told us. That's what I'd carried my whole life. But now Nathan was theirs, fully, undeniably theirs. And me? What did that make me? I swallowed, my voice barely above a whisper. So, what about me? The words slipped out before I could stop them, fragile and raw, hanging in the air like smoke. The table went quiet just for a second, long enough for me to feel the weight of every pair of eyes. Then Helen shifted in her seat, her smile tightening. "Oh, Elliot," she said, her tone light but clipped, like she was brushing off a stain. "It was complicated back then. We were young. The clinic wasn't exactly clear about, well, everything." She waved a hand, dismissing 32 years of my life in one gesture. Nathan laughed, leaning back. "Basically, I'm the jackpot and you're, I don't know, maybe someone else's prize." The table chuckled with him, the sound slicing through me. Someone else's prize, a mistake, a leftover. I felt my face burn, not with anger, but with something colder, humiliation maybe, or the slow realization that I'd never been part of their celebration, not tonight, not ever. I looked at George hoping for something, an anchor, a sign I wasn't invisible. He met my gaze, his eyes soft but pained, like he wanted to speak but couldn't. Not yet. I tried to shrink, smaller, to disappear into the chair, but the room kept moving without me. Nathan pulled out his phone, scrolling through his DNA results like they were a trophy. "Check this out," he said, passing it to Richard. "Says I've got Dad's jawline, Mom's eyes. No wonder I'm killing it at the bank." More laughter, more wine poured, more stories about Nathan's charmed life. I stared at my hands, calloused, still dusted with concrete from the site, and felt the distance between us grow, not just across the table, but across years. The times I'd fixed their sink, driven them to the airport, stayed up late balancing their checkbook when Richard forgot. None of it mattered, not to them. And then, like a scene from a movie I hadn't auditioned for, the waiter came back. He didn't go to Helen or Nathan or anyone who belonged here. He walked straight to me, his steps quiet but deliberate, and placed a small envelope in front of me. It was cream-colored, thick, sealed tight. My name, Elliot, was written across it in sharp, slanted handwriting. "The owner asked me to give this to you," the waiter said softly, then stepped away. Every head turned, their chatter pausing for the first time all night. Nathan raised an eyebrow, half amused. "What's that, your parking ticket?" Helen's smile faltered, her fingers tightening around her glass. Richard glanced at me, then away, like he'd rather not know. I touched the envelope, my fingers trembling, not from fear, but from the sudden certainty that this wasn't part of their plan. This was something else, something meant for me alone. The handwriting felt familiar, like a memory I couldn't place. And it stirred something deep inside, something I'd buried under years of showing up for people who didn't show up for me. I didn't open it. Not here, not with their eyes on me, waiting for me to play my role as the quiet one, the one who doesn't make a scene. I slipped it into my jacket pocket, the paper warm against my chest, and looked up. Nathan was already talking again, something about his next big deal. Helen sipped her wine. Richard checked his watch. "I need some air," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. I stood, my chair scraping softly against the floor. No one stopped me. No one asked if I was okay. The banner loomed above, its glitter catching the light, mocking me with every step toward the door. Our real son. I'd spent my life trying to earn a place at their table, but tonight I saw it clearly. There was no place for me. Not in their world, not in their truth. But that envelope in my pocket, it felt like a lifeline, a whisper of something bigger, something they couldn't control. And as I stepped into the cool night air, I knew I was about to find out what it was. When did you feel like you didn't belong in a place you thought was home? George's living room smelled of cedar and thyme, a quiet haven from the storm I'd left at Marino's. The old lamp cast a soft glow over the coffee table, where a wooden box sat like a relic, its edges worn from years of waiting. I sank onto the sagging couch, the envelope's words, "Sofia Marquez, your real mother," still pulsing through me. George sat across, his hands folded, his eyes heavy with regret and resolve. "I should have told you sooner," he said, voice low. "But I'm telling you now." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The banner, Nathan's smug laugh, Helen's dismissive wave, they felt like another life. Here in this room, I was about to meet the woman who'd love me first. George opened the box, revealing a stack of letters, a journal, and a small photograph. He handed me the photo, his fingers trembling. It was a hospital room, a young woman with dark curls and bright eyes cradling a baby, me, Sofia Marquez. Her smile was wide, unguarded, like she'd found everything she'd ever wanted in that moment. I traced her face, seeing my own cheekbones, my own stubborn jaw. "That's her," George said. "She called you her miracle." My chest ached, not with pain, but with recognition. I'd never known her, but I knew that smile. It was the kind I'd spent my life chasing. "She was a painter," George continued, his voice steady now. "Fearless with a brush, soft with people. She planned to raise you alone, no matter how hard it got." He pulled out a journal, its pages filled with Sofia's slanted handwriting. I opened it, my hands unsteady, and read a line. "Eli, my light, you're already stronger than the world." She'd written to me even before I was born. Each word felt like a tether, pulling me out of the shadows Helen had cast. I looked up, my voice breaking. "Why didn't they tell me?" George's face hardened. "Helen couldn't stand Sofia's light. They were best friends, but Helen always came second. When Sofia died, Helen saw a chance to rewrite the story. She took you in, not out of love, but to prove she could be better than Sofia's memory." His words cut deep, slicing through years of Helen's half-smiles and cold silences. I remembered her snapping at George when he'd given me a carved bird for my 8th birthday, saying it was clutter. Now I saw it. She wasn't protecting me. She was erasing Sofia. I flipped through the journal, landing on a sketch, a field of wildflowers, vibrant even in pencil. "She wanted to take you there," George said, pointing to the page. "Said you'd love the colors." I imagined Sofia, paint on her fingers, talking to me as she worked. The image was so vivid it hurt, a life stolen before I could live it. Anger flared, for Sofia, for myself, for every moment I'd spent begging for Helen's approval. But beneath it, something else grew. Hope. Sofia had loved me fiercely, without conditions. That love was mine, no matter what Helen did. George leaned forward, his eyes searching mine. "There's more. Letters, paintings, I kept them for you." I nodded, clutching the journal like a lifeline. I thought of Nathan, basking in his DNA results, and Helen, toasting her real son. They built a world where I was a footnote. But Sofia's world, her sketches, her words, made me the center. I looked at the photo again, her smile anchoring me. "I want to know everything," I said, my voice steady for the first time that night. We talked until the lamp flickered, the hours blurring. George told me Sofia's stories, how she'd paint at dawn, how she'd sing off-key to make her students laugh. Each detail was a brushstroke, painting a mother I'd never met but felt in my bones. I remembered Helen's voice at dinners, always praising Nathan's deals, never asking about my bridges. I'd thought that was family. Now I knew better. Family was this: George's quiet loyalty, Sofia's boundless love, a truth that didn't need glitter to shine. As dawn crept through the curtains, I made a choice. I wouldn't go back to Helen's house, to Richard's silence, to Nathan's taunts. Not out of anger, but because I deserved more. Sofia's journal lay open on my lap, her sketch of wildflowers catching the light. I didn't know how to paint, but I wanted to try. For her, for me. I looked at George, his face soft with relief. "Stay as long as you need," he said. I nodded, feeling something settle inside me, like a bridge finally built. Sofia was gone, but she'd left me a path, and I was ready to walk it. What's a memory that made you feel truly seen? The morning after I left George's house, I woke to a text from Helen. "Elliot, come home, let's talk." I stared at the screen, her words as hollow as the half-smile she'd given me for years. My thumb hovered over the reply button, but instead I deleted the message. I wasn't going back, not to her house, her table, or her lies. The journal in my bag, Sofia's sketch of wildflowers peeking out, reminded me I had something real now. I wasn't the son they'd forgotten. I was Sofia Marquez's son, and I was done begging for a place that was never mine. I sat in my truck outside George's, the engine still warm from the drive back to my apartment. The dawn light cut through the windshield, illuminating the photo of Sofia I'd tucked into the visor, her smile, my smile, a mirror I'd never seen until last night. I'd spent 32 years building bridges for others, literal ones at work, invisible ones at home, hoping Helen, Richard, or Nathan would cross them. But they never did. Sofia, though, she'd built a bridge to me with her words, her art, her love, and I was ready to walk it. The decision came fast, sharp, like a blueprint snapping into focus. I wouldn't just leave their world, I'd rewrite my own. That morning I drove to the courthouse, Sofia's journal on the seat beside me. The clerk handed me a form to change my name, her pen tapping impatiently. New name? She asked. I didn't hesitate. Elliot Marquez. Saying it aloud felt like laying a foundation, solid and true. When I walked out, the paper stamped and official, I stood taller, as if Sofia's strength had settled into my bones. Elliot Marquez wasn't a shadow. He was a man with a mother who'd loved him, a man who didn't need Helen's approval to exist. Back at my apartment, I packed a single box, work boots, a few shirts, my engineering books, and left the rest. The lease was month to month. I'd find somewhere new, closer to George, closer to the truth. My phone buzzed again as I loaded the truck. Nathan this time. Dude, you're overreacting. It was just a party. I read it twice, his casual dismissal cutting deeper than Helen's text. Just a party. Just my identity, erased in glitter. I blocked his number, then Richard's, then Helen's. Not out of anger, but clarity. I didn't owe them my pain. I moved into a small rental a mile from George's, a one-bedroom with a cracked window but a view of the Virginia hills. It felt like a blank canvas, and for the first time I wanted to paint. At a hardware store, I bought a cheap set of acrylics and a canvas. Sofia's wildflower sketch burned into my mind. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, brush in hand, feeling like a kid again, clumsy but free. The first strokes were messy, green for grass, yellow for flowers, but they were mine. I thought of Sofia, paint on her fingers, talking to me as she worked. You're my light, she'd written. I painted until midnight, the canvas coming alive, and felt her with me, guiding my hand. Work didn't stop even as my world shifted. I was back on the construction site Monday, checking beams under a gray sky. But something was different. I carried Sofia's photo in my wallet, her smile a quiet strength. When a young engineer asked about my weekend, I surprised myself. Found out about my mom, I said, tapping my wallet. She was a painter. His eyes lit up and we talked, really talked, about art, about family. I'd spent years hiding, but Sofia's truth made me visible, not just to others, but to myself. Helen called once more, leaving a voicemail. Elliot, this is ridiculous. We're still your family. I listened, her voice sharp with control, and deleted it. Family wasn't a banner or a shared last name. It was George, waiting with coffee when I visited. It was Sofia, her words in my hands. It was me, painting wildflowers, building a life that didn't need their validation. I thought of Nathan's smirk, Richard's silence, the way they'd let me fade. They hadn't lost anything that night at Marino's. I had, but I'd gained more. One evening, George came by, his old truck rattling into my driveway. He saw the canvas half finished and smiled. Looks like her, he said, nodding at the wildflowers. I told him about the name change, the move, the painting. His eyes glistened, but his voice was steady. You're doing what she'd have done, making your own way. We sat on the porch, the hills darkening, and I realized this was what I'd been searching for. Not a seat at Helen's table, but a place where I belonged. The painting wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I hung it above my desk, a reminder of Sofia's love, of my own strength. I didn't know where this path would lead, but I knew I was done looking back. Elliot Marquez wasn't just a name. It was a promise, to Sofia, to George, to myself. And as I stood in my new home, the hills quiet outside, I felt ready to keep it. When did you take a step to reclaim who you are? The Virginia hills glowed gold under the October sunset, their curves softening the edges of my new life. I stood in a small community gallery, the air humming with voices and the faint scent of fresh paint. My canvas, a field of wildflowers, vibrant and unpolished, hung beside Sofia's sketch, her pencil lines delicate but bold. A year ago, I was Elliot, the engineer who fixed things for a family that didn't see me. Now, as Elliot Marquez, I was here sharing my mother's art and my own, surrounded by strangers who felt more like home than Helen's table ever did. This was my exhibit, my truth, and it was enough. The gallery was a modest space, its white walls crowded with local art, but tonight, it was mine. George had helped me organize it, his steady hands hanging frames while I fumbled with price tags. Sofia would have loved this, he'd said, his voice thick with pride. I'd invited the community, co-workers, neighbors, even the young engineer who'd asked about my wallet photo months ago. They milled around now, sipping cheap wine, their murmurs weaving a warmth I hadn't known I craved. A woman in a red scarf paused at my painting, her head tilting. This feels alive, she said. I smiled, thinking of Sofia's journal. Eli, you're my light. My work wasn't perfect, but it carried her spark, and that was victory enough. I'd started painting after moving near George, each brushstroke a conversation with Sofia. My first canvases were clumsy, but they grew steadier, like the bridges I built at work. The exhibit wasn't just about art. It was about claiming a legacy Helen had tried to erase. I'd found one of Sofia's paintings in George's attic, a sunrise over a river, colors blazing, and hung it as the centerpiece. A man approached me, his glasses fogging slightly. "I knew Sofia," he said. "She taught me to see light in shadows." My throat tightened. She wasn't just mine. She'd touched lives, and through this night I was giving her back to the world. Work had changed too. I'd been promoted to lead engineer, my designs shaping a new highway. I mentored younger crew members, sharing lessons Sofia's courage taught me. Stand firm, even when the ground shakes. I kept her photo in my badge holder, not for show, but for strength. One day, a coworker spotted it. "Your mom?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, the word easy now. "She was a painter." He nodded and we moved on. But that moment, owning her, owning me, felt like crossing a finish line. Helen's family was a closed chapter. Nathan sent one last text months ago. "You're making a mistake." I didn't reply. Helen called once, her voicemail sharp. "We raised you, Elliot." I deleted it, not from spite, but from peace. They'd chosen their story, glitter and all, but I'd chosen mine. George was my family now, his porch our sanctuary. We'd sit there evenings, him with coffee, me with a sketch pad, trading stories of Sofia. He showed me her old paintbrushes, their handles worn smooth. "She'd be proud," he said once, and I believed him. Not because I needed it, but because it was true. The exhibit drew a small crowd, but their presence filled me. A teenager lingered by Sofia's sunrise, her eyes wide. "It's like it's moving," she said. I told her about Sofia, how she'd paint at dawn to catch the light. The girl listened, then said, "You're lucky to have her." I nodded, my chest full. Lucky didn't cover it. Sofia had given me more in her absence than Helen had in 32 years. I glanced at George across the room, his smile quiet but bright. He'd kept Sofia alive for me, and now we were building something new. Not just family, but home. As the night wound down, I stood by my painting, the wildflowers catching the gallery's soft light. A year ago, I'd sat under a banner that called someone else real. Now I knew what real was. Sofia's love, George's loyalty, my own heart, finally free. I didn't need Helen's table or Nathan's spotlight. I had this, paint on my hands, a community around me, a name that fit. Elliot Marquez wasn't a question anymore. He was an answer. I stepped outside, the hills dark now, the stars sharp above. Sofia's sunrise painting flashed in my mind, her colors bold against the night. I felt her, not as a ghost but as a pulse, steady and sure. George joined me, his hand on my shoulder. "You did good, kid," he said. I smiled, the weight of the year lifting. I'd lost a family I never had, but I'd found one that was mine, through art, through truth, through me. What makes a family real to you? I'm Elliot Marquez, and my journey taught me family isn't blood, it's love that sees you. I spent years chasing a place at a table that wasn't mine, but Sofia's legacy showed me I'm enough. To anyone feeling invisible, know this: your worth isn't their approval. Build your own path like I did with paint and truth. What's a moment you found your strength? Share below, type 1 if this moved you, or tell me where you're watching from. If it didn't hit, let me know why. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more tales of courage and connection. Let's keep building bridges together.